Darius the Great is not okay. Page 1. The chiefest and greatest of calamities. Steam belched and hissed. Sweat trickled down the back of my neck. Smaug the Terrible was furious with me. What does it mean, filter error? I asked. Here, Mr. Apatan wiggled the hose where it fed into Smaug's gleaming chrome back. The blinking red arrow light went dark. Better? I think so. Smaug gurgled happily and began boiling once again. Good. Were you just pushing buttons? No, I said, just to check the temperature. You don't have to check it, Darius. It always stays at 212. Right. There was no use arguing with Charles Apatan, manager of the Tea Haven at the shops at Fairview Court. He was convinced, despite all the articles I printed out for him, he refused to read web pages, that each and every tea should be steeped at a full boil, whether it was a robust Yunnan or a fragile Gyokuro. Not that Tea Haven ever got such fine teas. Everything we sold was enriched with antioxidants, or enhanced with natural superfood extracts, or formulated for health and beauty. Smaug, the irrepressibly finicky, was our industrial-strength water boiler. I named it Smaug my first week on the job when I got scalded 3 times in a single shift, but so far the name hadn't stuck with anyone else at Tea Haven. Mr. Apatan passed me an empty pump-action thermos. We need more blueberry acai bliss. I shoveled tea from the bright orange tin into the filter basket, topped it with 2 scoops of rock sugar, and tucked it under the spigot. Smaug, the unassailably pressurized, spat its steaming contents into the thermos. I flinched as boiling water spattered my hands. Smaug, the chiefest and greatest of calamities, was triumphant once more. As a people group, Persians are genetically predisposed to like tea. And even though I was only half Persian, I had inherited a full-strength tea-loving gene sequence from my mom. You know how Persians make tea? My mom would ask. How? I would say. We put hell in it and we damn it, she would say, and I would laugh because it was funny to hear my mom, who never used colorful metaphors, pretend to curse. In Farsi, hell means cardamom, which is what makes Persian tea so delicious, and damn means to steep. When I explained the joke to Mr. Apatan, he was not amused. You can't swear at the customers, Darius, he said. I wasn't going to. It's Farsi. It's a joke. You can't do that. Charles Apatan was the most literal person I knew. After I replenished our strategically located sample thermoses with fresh tea, I refilled the plastic cups at each station. I was categorically opposed to plastic sample cups. Everything tasted gross out of plastic, all chemically and bland. It was deeply disgusting. Not that it made much difference at Tea Haven. The sugar content in our samples was high enough to mask the taste of the plastic cups, maybe even high enough to dissolve them given enough time. The Tea Haven at the shops at Fairview Court was not a bad place to work, not really. It was a significant upgrade over my last job, spinning the daily special sign at one of those take-it-and-bake-it pizza places, and it would look good on my resume. That way, when I graduated, I could work at an artisanal tea store instead of one that added the latest superfood extract to whatever dismal fannings the corporate tea blenders could find at the steepest discount. My dream job was Rose City Teas, this place in the Northwest District that did small batch hand-selected teas. There were no artificial flavorings in Rose City's tea, but you had to be 18 to work there. I was stuffing the cups into their spring-loaded dispenser when Trent Bolger's hyena laugh rang through the open doorway. I was completely exposed. The entire front of Tea Haven was composed of giant windows which, though tinted to reduce sun exposure, still offered a full and enticing view of the wares and employees inside. I silently wished for the sun to bounce off the window, blinding Trent and cloaking me from what was sure to be an unpleasant encounter. Or at the very least for Trent to keep on walking and not recognize me in my work uniform of black shirt and bright blue apron. It did not work. Trent Bolger rounded the corner and instantly got a sensor lock on me. He grabbed the door frame and swung himself into the store, followed by one of his soulless minions of orthodoxy, Chip Kusumanu. Hey, D's nuts! Trent Bolger never called me Darius, not if there is a suggestive nickname he could use instead. Mom always said she named me after Darius the Great, but I think she and Dad were setting themselves up for disappointment, naming me after a historical figure like that. I was many things, D-hole, D-wad, D's nuts, but I was definitely not great. If anything, I was a great target for Trent Bolger and his soulless minions of orthodoxy. When your name begins with D, the sexual innuendos practically write themselves. At least Trent was predictable. Trent Bolger was not technically a bully. Chapel Hill High School, where Trent, Chip, and I were sophomores, had a zero-tolerance policy toward bullying. It also had zero-tolerance policies toward fighting, plagiarism, drugs, and alcohol. And if everyone at Chapel Hill High School tolerated Trent's behavior, that meant he wasn't a bully, right? Trent and I had known each other since kindergarten. We were friends back then in the way that everyone is friends in kindergarten before socio-political alliances begin to cement, and then, by the time third grade rolls around, you find yourself spending every game of heads down, thumbs up with your head down and your thumbs up, completely ignored by your entire class until you begin to wonder if you've turned invisible. Trent Bolger was only a level 2 athlete, level 3 at best. He played something back on the Chapel Hill High School junior varsity football team, Go Chargers. And he was not particularly good looking either. Trent was almost a head shorter than me, with close cropped black hair, blocky black glasses, and a nose that turned up sharply at the end. Trent Bolger had the largest nostrils of anyone I'd ever seen. Nonetheless, Trent was disproportionately popular among Chapel Hill High School's sophomore class. Chip Kuzumano was taller, better looking, and cooler. His hair was long and swoopy on top, with the sides shaved. He had the elegant sort of curved nose you saw in statues and paintings, and his nostrils were perfectly proportioned. He was also nicer than Trent, to most people, if not to me, which of course meant he was far less popular. Also, his real name was Cyprian, which was an even more unusual name than Darius. Trent Bolger shared his last name with Fredegar Fatty Bolger, a hobbit from The Lord of the Rings. He's the one that stays home in the Shire while Frodo and company go on their adventure. Fatty Bolger is pretty much the most boring hobbit ever. I never called Trent Fatty to his face. It was a level 5 disaster. I had avoided letting anyone at Chapel Hill High School know where I worked, specifically to keep that knowledge from falling into the hands of Trent and the soulless minions of orthodoxy. Chip Kusumano nodded at me from the doorway and began to examine our line of brightly colored steeper mugs. But Trent Bolger headed straight for my station. He was wearing gray, swishy shorts and his Chapel Hill High School wrestling team sweatshirt. Trent and Chip both wrestled in the winter. Trent was junior varsity, but Chip had managed a spot on the varsity roster, the only sophomore to do so. Chip had on his team sweatshirt too, but he wore it with his usual black joggers, the kind with stripes down the sides that taper around the ankles. I never saw Chip in swishy shorts outside of gym class, which I assumed was for the same reason I avoided them. It was the only thing we had in common. Trent Bolger stood in front of me grinning. He knew I couldn't escape him at work. "Welcome to Tea Haven," I said, which was the corporate mandated greeting. "Would you like to sample one of our fine teas today?" Technically, I was also supposed to produce a corporate mandated smile, but I was not a miracle worker. "Do you guys sell tea bags?" Across the store, Chip smirked and shook his head. I knew what Trent was trying to do. This was not Chapel Hill High School, and the Tea Haven at the shops at Fairview Court did not have a zero-tolerance policy toward bullying. "No, we only sell mesh strainers and biodegradable sachets." "That's a shame. I bet you really like tea bags." Trent's grin crept up on one side of his face. He only ever smiled with half his mouth. "You just seem like the type of guy who would really enjoy them." You must get teabagged a lot, right?" "I'm trying to work, Trent," I said. Then, because I had the tingly feeling that Mr. Apotan was somewhere close by, carefully watching and critiquing my customer service, I cleared my throat and asked, "Would you like to try our Orange Blossom Awesome Herbal Tisane?" I refused to call it tea when it did not contain any actual tea leaves. "What's it taste like?" I pulled a sample cup out of the stack, filled it with a pump of Orange Blossom Awesome, and offered it to Trent, using my flat palm as a sort of saucer. He downed it in one swallow. "Ugh, this tastes like orange juice and balls." Chip Kusumano laughed into the empty tea tin he was examining. It was one of our new spring-patterned ones with cherry blossoms on it. "Did you brew it right, Darius?" Mr. Apotan asked behind me. Mr. Apotan was even shorter than Fatty Bolger, but somehow he managed to take up more space as he stepped between us to fill a sample cup of his own. Fatty winked at me. "Catch you later, D-bag." D-bag. My newest suggestive nickname. It was only a matter of time. Trent nodded at Chip, who grinned and waved innocently at me, as if he hadn't just played accomplice to my humiliation. They jostled each other out the door, laughing. "Thank you for visiting Tea Haven," I said. "Come again soon." The corporate mandated farewell. "Did he just call you teabag?" Mr. Apotan asked. "No." "Did you tell him about our mesh baskets?" I nodded. He slurped his sample. "Well, this is right. Good job, Darius." Thanks. I had done nothing worthy of praise. Anyone could brew Orange Blossom Awesome. That was the whole point and purpose of Tea Haven. Was that a friend of yours from school? Clearly, the nuances of my interaction with Fatty Bulger, the world's most boring hobbit, were also lost on Charles Apatow. Next time, have him try the Blueberry Bliss. Okay. Truck nuts. The bike rack for the shops at Fairview Court was located at the far end of the shopping center, right outside one of those clothing stores that catered to soulless minions of orthodoxy like Fatty Bulger and Chip Cusimano. The kind that had pictures of shirtless guys with abdomens that could only be expressed in integers. 5 different kinds of overpowering cologne waged war in my sinuses as I passed the store. When I made it out into the parking lot, the sun was still up, barely, but the mercury lights had come on. The air smelled dry and vacant after weeks of rain. I had been riding my bike from Chapel Hill High School to the Tea Haven at the shops at Fairview Court ever since I got the job. It was easier than getting a ride from either of my parents. But when I got to the bike rack, my bicycle was gone. Upon closer inspection, that was not technically true. Only part of my bike was gone. The frame was there, but the wheels were missing. The bike slumped against the post, held on by my lock. The seat was missing too, and whoever had taken it had left some sort of blue blob in its place. Well, it was not a blue blob. It was a pair of blue rubber testicles. I had never seen blue rubber testicles before, but I knew right away where they had come from. Like I said, there was no zero-tolerance policy toward bullying at the shops at Fairview Court. There was one toward stealing, but apparently that didn't cover bicycle seats. My backpack sagged on my shoulders. I had to call my dad. Darius, is everything okay? Dad always said that. Not, hi Darius, but is everything okay? Hey, can you come pick me up from work? Did something happen? It was humiliating telling my father about the blue rubber testicles, especially because I knew he would laugh. Really? You mean like truck nuts? What are truck nuts? People hook them on the hitch of their truck so it looks like the truck has testicles. The back of my neck prickled. In the course of our phone call, my father and I had used the word testicles more than was healthy for any father-son relationship. All right, I'll be there in a bit. Did you get the goldfish? Dad breathed a level 5 disappointed sigh. My ears burned. I'll go grab them now. Hey, son. Dad got out of his car and helped me load my wheelless, seatless bike into the trunk of his Audi. Stephen Kellner loved his Audi. Hi, Dad. What happened to the truck nuts? I threw them away. I did not need the reminder. Dad pressed the button to close the trunk and got back in. I tossed my backpack onto the back seat and then slumped in the passenger seat with the goldfish suspended in their plastic prison between my legs. I almost didn't believe you. I know. It had taken him 30 minutes to come get me. We only lived a 10-minute drive away. Sorry about your bike. Does security know who did it? I buckled my seatbelt. No, but I'm sure it was Trent Boulder. Dad put the Audi in drive and took off down the parking lot. Stephen Kellner liked to drive much too fast because his Audi had lots of horsepower and he could do that kind of thing. Accelerate to escape velocity, slam the brakes when he had to, in order to avoid running over a toddler holding his brand new Build-A-Bear, and then accelerate again. Thankfully, the Audi had all sorts of flashing lights and sensors, so it could sound red alert when a collision was imminent. Dad kept his eyes on the road. What makes you think it was Trent? I wasn't sure I wanted to tell my father the entire humiliating saga. Darius? Stephen Kellner never took no for an answer. I told him about Trent and Chip, but only in the broadest strokes. I avoided mentioning Trent's references to teabagging. I did not want to talk to Stephen Kellner about testicles ever again. That's it? Dad shook his head. How do you know it was them, then? I knew, but that never mattered to Stephen Kellner, devil's advocate. Never mind, Dad. You know, if you just stood up for yourself, they'd leave you alone. I sucked on the tassels of my hoodie. Stephen Kellner didn't understand anything about the socio-political dynamics of Chapel Hill High School. As we turned onto the freeway, he said, "You need a haircut." I scratched the back of my head. It's not that long. My hair barely touched my shoulders, though part of that was how it curled away at the ends. That didn't matter, though. Stephen Kellner had very short, very straight, very blonde hair, and he had very blue eyes, too. My father was pretty much the Ubermensch. I did not inherit any of my dad's good looks. People said I had his strong jawline, whatever that meant, but really I mostly looked like Mom, with black, loosely curled hair and brown eyes. Standard Persian. Some people said Dad had Aryan looks, which always made him uncomfortable. The word Aryan used to mean noble. It's an old Sanskrit word, and Mom says it's actually the root word for Iran, but it means something different now. Sometimes I thought about how I was half Aryan and half Aryan, but I guess that made me kind of uncomfortable too. Sometimes I thought about how strange it was that a word could change its meaning so drastically. Sometimes I thought about how I didn't really feel like Stephen Kellner's son at all. The Distinguished Picard Crescent. Despite what boring hobbits like Fatty Bolger might have thought, I did not go home and have falafel for dinner. First of all, falafel is not really a Persian food. Its mysterious origins are lost to a prior age of this world. Whether it came from Egypt or Israel is somewhere else entirely. One thing is certain, falafel is not Persian. Second, I did not like falafel because I was categorically opposed to beans, except jelly beans. I changed out of my Tea Haven shirt and joined my family at the dinner table. Mom had made spaghetti and meat sauce, perhaps the least Persian food ever, though she did add a bit of turmeric to the sauce, which gave it a slight orange cast to the oil. Mom only ever cooked Persian food on the weekends because pretty much every Persian menu was a complicated affair involving several hours of stewing, and she didn't have the time to devote to a stew when she was overwhelmed with a level 6 coding emergency. Mom was a UX designer at a firm in downtown Portland, which sounded incredibly cool, except I didn't really understand what it was that Mom actually did. Dad was a partner in an architecture firm that mostly designed museums and concert halls and other centerpieces for urban living. Most nights, we ate dinner at a round, marble-top table in the corner of the kitchen, all four of us arranged in a little circle, Mom across from Dad and me across from my little sister, Lala, who was in 2nd grade. While I twirled spaghetti around my fork, Lala launched into a detailed description of her day, including a complete play-by-play of the game of heads down, thumbs up they played after lunch, in which Lala was it 3 different times. She was only in 2nd grade, with an even more Persian name than mine, and yet she was way more popular than I was. I didn't get it. Park never guessed it was me, Lala said. He never guesses right. It's because you have such a good poker face, I said. Probably. I loved my little sister, really. It was impossible not to. It wasn't the kind of thing I could ever say to anyone, not out loud at least. I mean, guys are not supposed to love their little sisters. We can look out for them, we can intimidate whatever dates they bring home, although I hope that was still a few years away for Lala. But we can't say we love them. We can't admit to having tea parties or playing dolls with them, because that's unmanly. But I did play dolls with Lala, and I had tea parties with her, though I insisted we serve real tea, not imaginary tea, and certainly not anything from Tea Haven, and I was not ashamed of it. I just didn't tell anyone about it. That's normal, right? At last, Lala's story ran out of steam, and she began scooping spaghetti into her mouth with her spoon. My sister always cut her spaghetti up instead of twirling it, which I felt defeated the point and purpose of spaghetti. I used the lull in conversation to reach across the table for more pasta, but Dad pressed the salad bowl into my hands instead. There was no point arguing with Stephen Kellner about dietary indiscretions. Thanks, I mumbled. Salad was inferior to spaghetti in every possible way. After dinner, Dad washed the dishes and I dried them while I waited for my electric kettle to reach 180 degrees Fahrenheit, which is what I liked for steeping my genmaicha. Genmaicha is a Japanese green tea with toasted rice in it. Sometimes the toasted rice pops like popcorn, leaving little white fluffy clouds in the tea. It's grassy and nutty and delicious, kind of like pistachios, and it's the same greenish-yellow color as pistachios too. No one else in my family drank genmaicha. No one ever drank anything besides Persian tea. Mom and Dad would sniff and sip sometimes, but if I made a cup of something and begged them to taste it, but that was it. My parents didn't know genmaicha had toasted rice in it, mostly because I didn't want Mom to know. Persians have very strong feelings about the proper applications of rice. No true Persian ever popped theirs. When the dishes were done, Dad and I settled in for our nightly tradition. We sank into the tan suede couch shoulder to shoulder, the only time we ever sat like this, and Dad queued up our next episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Every night, Dad and I watched exactly one episode of Star Trek. We watched them in broadcast order, starting with the original series, though things got complicated after the 5th season of The Next Generation, since its 6th season overlapped Deep Space Nine. I had long since seen every episode of each series, even the animated series. Probably more than once, though watching with Dad stretched back to when I was little, and my memory was a bit hazy, but that didn't matter. One episode a night, every night. That was our thing. It felt good to have a thing with Dad, when I could have him to myself for 47 minutes, and he could act like he enjoyed my company for the span of one episode. Tonight it was Who Watches the Watchers, which is an episode from the third season where a pre-warp culture starts to worship Captain Picard as a deity called the Picard. I could understand their impulse. Captain Picard was, without doubt, the best captain from Star Trek. He was smart, he loved tea, Earl Grey, hot, and he had the best voice ever, deep and resonant and British. My own voice was far too squeaky to ever captain a starship. Not only that, but he was bald and still managed to be confident, which was good because I had seen pictures of the men on my mom's side of the family, and they all shared the distinguished Picard crescent. I didn't take after Stephen Kellner, Teutonic Ubermensch in many ways, but I hoped I would keep a full head of hair like his, even if mine was black and curly, and needed a haircut according to Ubermensch standards. Sometimes I thought about getting the sides faded, or maybe growing my hair out and doing a man bun. That would drive Stephen Kellner crazy. Captain Picard was delivering his first monologue of the episode when the doot-doot klaxon of Mom's computer rang through the house. She was getting a video call. Dad paused the show for a second and glanced up the stairs. "Uh-oh," he said. "We're being hailed." Dad smiled at me, and I smiled back. Dad and I never smiled at each other, not really, but we were still in our magic 47-minute window where the normal rules don't apply. Dad preemptively turned up the volume on the TV. Sure enough, after a second, Mom started yelling in Farsi at her computer. "Jamshid!" Mom shouted. I could hear her even over the musical swell right before the act break. For some reason, whenever she was talking over the computer, Mom had to make sure the sound of her voice reached low Earth orbit. "Chitorito," she bellowed. That's Farsi for "how are you," but only if you are familiar with the person you're speaking to or older than them. Farsi has different ways of talking to people, depending on the formality of the situation and your relationship to the person you are addressing. The thing about Farsi is it's a very deep language, deeply specific, deeply poetic, deeply context sensitive. For instance, take my mom's oldest brother, Jamshid. Dai is the word for uncle, but not just uncle, a specific uncle, your mother's brother. And it's not only the word for uncle, it's also the relationship between you and your uncle. So I could call Dai Jamshid my Dai, but he could call me Dai also as a term of endearment. My knowledge of Farsi consisted of 4 primary vectors. 1, familial relations. 2, food words, because Mom always called the Persian food she cooked by its proper name. 3, tea words, because, well, I'm me. And 4, politeness phrases, the sort you learn in middle school foreign language classes, though no middle school in Portland has ever offered Farsi as an option. The truth was, my Farsi was abysmal. I never really learned growing up. "I didn't think you'd ever use it," Mom told me when I asked her why, which didn't make any sense because Mom had Persian friends here in the States, plus all her family back in Iran. Unlike me, Lala did speak Farsi, pretty much fluently. When she was a baby, Mom talked to her in Farsi and had all her friends do the same. Lala grew up with the ear for it, the uvular fricatives and alveolar trills that I could never get quite right. When she was a baby, I tried to talk to Lala in Farsi too, but I never really got the hang of it, and Mom's friends kept correcting me, so after a while, I kind of gave up. After that, me and Dad talked to Lala exclusively in English. It always seemed like Farsi was this special thing between Mom and Lala, like Star Trek was between Dad and me. That left the two of us in the dark whenever we were at gatherings with Mom's friends. That was the only time Dad and I were on the same team, when we were stuck with Farsi speakers and left with each other for company. But even when that happened, we just ended up standing around in a level 7 awkward silence. Stephen Kellner and I were experts at high-level awkward silences. Lala flounced onto the couch on Dad's other side and tucked her feet beneath her butt, disturbing the gravitational fields on the couch, so Dad leaned away from me and toward her. Dad paused the show. Lala never watched Star Trek with us. It was me and Dad's thing. "What's up, Lala?" Dad asked. "Mom's talking to Dai Jamshid," she said. "He's at Mamu and Babu's house right now." Mamu and Babu were Mom's parents. Their real names were Fariba and Ardashir, but we always called them Mamu and Babu. Mamu and Babu mean mother and father in Dari, which is the dialect my grandparents spoke growing up Zoroastrian in Yazid. "Stephen, Lala, Darius," Mom's voice carried from upstairs. "Come say hello." Lella sprang from the couch and ran back upstairs. I looked at Dad, who shrugged, and we both followed my sister up to the office.